Hello, I'm Kelly Crimmins, Community Outreach Specialist for Plano Parks and Recreation. Springtime is here, and as you've noticed, we've seen a lot of dormant grasses and plants coming back into bloom, and it's really exciting. This is also a time where we get questions from residents regarding our irrigation best practices. We receive questions such as how much water does it take to keep Plano's parks and athletic fields so nice and healthy, while at the same time falling in with the City of Plano's overall water conservation methods. So to find out more, I reached out to my friend Matt Harned in our Parks Division. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Kelly, how are you?
Good, good. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, well, we just have a couple. I have a lot of questions, but we're going to keep it kind of, we'll keep it to the basic minimum. But first of all, tell us a little bit about what you do in our department.
Yeah, so I supervise a portion of the Parks Department's irrigation team. So I've got six guys that take care of parks and public buildings. We make irrigation repairs and do maintenance to keep things running well. And then I also help with park and irrigation renovations. I have a project manager who works for me who's amazing. And we also help with other departments' irrigation portion of their projects for park planning and engineering. So we stay pretty busy.
I could see how those three come into play when we're talking about irrigation. It's a lot of planning among all aspects. So, okay, so we have roughly, and correct me if I'm wrong, roughly 1,200 acres of irrigated parks, fields, and public property. What is the irrigation cycle, so to speak, like, what is that like during a typical year for us?
We base a lot of our planning and programming around the season. So we have different types of starts to the season. Sometimes we get more rain. And so we adapt our irrigation water to that. We try not to water if we don't need to, but if it's needed, we go ahead and ramp things up. And so we're watching this year. We've had a lot of snow and it's infiltrating into the ground. So we're watching really the moisture content of the soil. That's what helps us determine how much we irrigate. And so we try to be responsive to what we see while protecting those assets we have in place. So it depends, I guess, is the answer.
Yeah, but it's always looking at, like you said, the seasons. I mean, we say like this winter it was a wet season, looking into summer, keeping all that in mind can help you prepare for what's ahead, I assume.
It's true. And we'll talk about it a little bit more later, but we use technology also to help us to determine what things are looking like, when we may be forecasting to need more irrigation. Obviously, as it gets hotter, we're planning around that. So we try to be as responsive as possible to the season and also put water down just with the main goal of keeping things healthy and keeping it safe for the public.
Sure. And what are some common misconceptions that people might have when it comes to Plano's irrigation practices?
We're pretty fortunate in the city of Plano. Our residents are really knowledgeable about water conservation and irrigation practices. Many of them have an irrigation system in their yard. In the past, we heard some concerns about how often our systems run is one thing, that perhaps we were over watering. But we have such a massive amount of space and area that we have to irrigate that sometimes our schedules have to be a little bit different than what a residential system would be. So one thing we did to help educate the public on the parameters that we have is we created a web page on plano.gov that helps people to see the scale to which we irrigate. There's even a model that shows one of our parks and the size of a common residential yard in it, just to show the massive area that we have to water. And so we put a lot of time and energy into calculating water usage, as I mentioned earlier, so that we can conserve water is a main priority, but also a priority is to keep things safe. We have a lot of patrons that use our sites, whether it's parks or athletic sites. And we want to make sure that we're also not putting them in danger. And so because of those parameters, sometimes we have to water outside of the normal range. We can't do in a lot of sites, for example, just 1 or 2 nights per week
Right.
to put down like an inch of water as we try to shoot for in the summertime when it's really hot and we haven't gotten rain. We might have to water in 3 or 4 nights, but proportionately, we're not using more water than a typical residential system. It just takes us a little bit longer to put it down. And so that's something that some have had concerns about in the past, but we've come a long way to help people understand why we have to do that on occasion.
I mean, it sounds like you guys have it. It's a science, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, and a lot of math involved, and trying to make sure that we're doing just so when we're irrigating, that we don't use too much, that we do just enough.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So what are some conservation, that being said, what are some conservation methods that we use here in the city of Plano to balance the need for irrigation and also the need to conserve?
That typically starts with planning, and everyone, as they're looking at a new facility or a new park, some sort of area or space that we're going to landscape, we're looking at the very beginning of how we can conserve water. So if possible, we hardscape where we can, where we don't have to use water. And when we do, we use drought tolerant materials with low water requirements, so that we can make sure that we're using as minimal amount of water as possible.
Okay.
We also practice hydrozoning, which is grouping plant materials together that have similar water requirements, so that we're putting down just enough for that species, but we're not overwatering in some other space, and that helps us to conserve as well.
Oh, wow. So using the environment, or creating an environment that is supportive of our local water conservation needs. That's neat.
Yeah, yeah.
That's really fascinating. Okay.
Yeah, a lot of thought goes into that. And the same is true with the type of products we use. We look for products that also conserve water. So we use heads that have what's called match precipitation, where they're putting out the same amount. So we can really control the amount of water that's going out. Excuse me. I get choked up when I talk about this sometimes. And irrigation heads and nozzles that have low flow rates, which helps with runoff.
Sure.
So we put a lot of time and effort into really making sure, especially in newer stuff, that we're using the cutting edge of materials that will help us to conserve.
Sure.
So it's really helpful.
Okay. Well, you mentioned the newer projects, and we just finished renovating Steiner Park, which also included installing a new irrigation system. And that was a pretty old park. Well, I won't say old park. It has been around for a while. And so I'm assuming that it was in need for some upgrades. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that park was built in 1992. And in park years, that's a little bit old. It needed some updates in some different areas. And, when we look at that, we're looking at in part maintenance costs. How much time are we having to spend in different areas to keep something running efficiently and making repairs? And so we keep that in mind as we're looking at renovation schedules and such, so that we aren't spending more money than we should. It kind of gets to that point where it's time. And Steiner got to that point. So yeah, we did a renovation that included a new irrigation system, and we focused in that park to be able to put down the amount of water needed for it in 2 nights, which mirrors what the residents' water restrictions are like most of the year.
Right.
So we wanted to make sure that matched. Then we also did some improvements to the drainage. We had some low areas in that park, so we corrected that. We also did a new trail connection and some new sod and trees. And so, yeah, it's a beautiful park.
That's great. Now, I just as a side question or follow-up question, I'd be curious to find out if there was a way that we could compare, say, maybe, I don't know if we could do this, say water, how much water did we need or did we use to keep that park irrigated in the past several years compared to, and then compare that to the few years from now, and maybe compare, would we be, would we be saving more, would we be conserving more water with these new
Right.
grades? I'd be really curious to find out about that. So,
We do track that. We watch how much water we use at every park from year to year. We have that data. So the footprint of that park largely remained the same, with the sod in the same areas. So the amount of water the park needs didn't probably change too much. But what did change was the efficiency of the irrigation system. So we'll find some savings there, simply because we've got some materials that are a little bit more highly efficient, and just the way we designed it is more efficient.
And fixing
And
those
one,
drainage problems. Yeah.
that's right. Yeah, that's helpful. And then another component that I didn't mention earlier, we use a type of central controlled irrigation monitoring system where we're able to see how much water every site is using, not just for the year, but every time it runs. And so if we get a leak or there's a problem, it gives us a signal that says, hey, this zone is having an issue, and it'll stop that zone from running until we go out and check it and make a repair and figure out what's wrong with it. So we're pretty fortunate with the really wonderful program we have in place to help us with that, which helps us to conserve as well. And we have a whole dedicated team that's great at making sure that system itself runs efficiently. And so, yeah, we have some really nice features in place.
Well, and you're getting all that information in real time. That's really important. That's really fascinating. Well, what else would you like residents to know about our irrigation system before we close?
I would just like to say overall how much we appreciate the opportunity to serve the citizens of Plano. As I mentioned before, my department is only one facet of the Parks and Recreation team who's dedicated to making Plano's park and athletic sites as enjoyable and safe of a space for our residents to be in while practicing water conservation methods to the best of our abilities. And we're constantly looking to improve. So I guess to the residents, we just want to say thanks for the opportunity to serve you.
Yeah, it's a group effort, right? I mean, in terms of, I think we all know a lot around here about the importance of water conservation and different methods. So, I mean, I think this is something that everybody can learn a little bit from. I hope you learned a little bit from talking and listening to Matt today. Thank you so much, Matt, for joining me and kind of breaking things down for me. It's really, again, the word is fascinating to me. I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having us, and appreciate the time.
Okay. Well, if you want to learn more about the City of Plano's irrigation practices, you can visit our irrigation webpage, as Matt had mentioned, and you can find that on the Parks tab at planoparks.org. And in the meantime, I'm going to be talking with Katie Mizuki next time. She's with Live Green in Plano, and she's going to talk to me a little bit more about the residential side of irrigation. What are some ways that you can get your watering system ready for this spring and summer? So we'll have something for you next week on that. In the meantime, stay safe. Bye.